Great. As these panelists find their seats, I'm going to ask everybody who has an empty seat next to them where they know no one's sitting to please raise your hand. We have people standing. So those who are standing, if you'd like to sit, we're not going to force you to sit, but there are seats in the room. There's a seat up here, up front. There's a seat right there. So if anybody wants to sit, I encourage you to please find a seat. They're difficult to find at the front of the room. Okay, great. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Mindy Thompson Full-of-Love. She is a professor of urban policy and health at the New School. She is also a board-certified psychiatrist. She studied epidemic support communities as well as ways to repair them. And from her research, she has published over 100 articles as well as 6 books. And we have the pleasure of having Antonia Villarruel, who will be moderating and facilitating a discussion with Mindy. And Antonia is one of our advisors, and she is a Margaret Bond Simon Dean of Nursing at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and director of the school's World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Nursing and Midwifery Leadership. So welcome.
Thank you all for being here. It's a real privilege. As part of the planning committee, we started talking about the culture of health and really what that was and really what that meant. And what we came to realize, and again, and thanks to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and again, thanks for the leadership in sort of blowing up the foundation and recalibrating in order to address the culture of health. It didn't come without its controversy, and I know you're still hearing that, but I think we as a community here are really grateful for that leadership. What we recognized on the planning committee that this is not a new, we look at the culture of health as a movement. And we recognized on our planning committee that this is not the beginning of the story, but it is a continual story. Our history as Americans have been built on movements, the Tea Party, voter rights, women's rights, civil rights, etc. And so we felt it important to go back and take a look at what made a successful movement and what can we learn in order to be able to move forward. And I think with that, you're going to be inspired by a wonderful story and great insight. So Mindy, welcome.
Good morning. Yeah. It's been very inspiring so far. I was asked, and you'll see on the agenda that it says this is supposed to be inspirational. And I said that just to clear my listening, these are tough times. And they said, yes, so be inspirational. So I certainly feel better than I did a year ago today. So just to plunge in, I am a culture of health groupie, you might say. I've been part of 3 culture of health programs. This is my interdisciplinary research leadership team. We're working on looking at gentrification and the issues of making a just city. And here we are exploring the Shaw neighborhood of DC, which has been heavily gentrified. Now we're poster people. Anyway, we highly urge people, if you're thinking about it, apply. It's an amazing program. And so as a culture of health groupie, one of the things that, and one of the reasons I'm so committed to this program is that I really adhere to these principles. I think they're great. But especially, it's the last one, number 10. Americans understand that we're all in this together, which as a psychiatrist, I think is really indicating a revolution in consciousness, because we have very much an individual consciousness. And our Native American relatives have been trying to tell us this is not the way the world works. And Reverend Martin Luther King has been trying to tell us this is not the way the world, a lot of people have been trying to tell us this is not the way the world works. We're all in this together, but it's really, if we integrate this into our thinking, then we will live in a different way. And this, I think, is what culture of health is. The principle is one that I think is of extraordinary importance for the world today. So Americans understand that we're all in this together, but do we? And I think there are two problems for Americans. One is all, because we don't think in terms of all, we think in terms of our group. And the other is this. What is this? If Americans don't understand ecology, they don't understand the environment, they don't understand interdependence. So we're in a tough fight. One of the ways that I've been thinking about this is that 2019 will mark the 400th anniversary of the first arrival of Africans in Jamestown. And so I've been working with my class to make a timeline of these 400 years of inequality, looking specifically at women's African American, Native American, and working people's history. And what it shows is that we are really in an ecology of inequality. And that's what I think this is, that we're all in this together. I thought I would start, therefore, with the story of my parents. These are my parents, Maggie and Ernie Thompson. And they got married in 1953. And so to be an interracial couple in 1953 was to be flying in the face of all the traditions. It was very challenging. So my mom said to my dad, I bought a house in Orange, New Jersey. And my dad said, Orange? That's a dirty Jim Crow town going nowhere. What would I be doing in Orange? So my dad was an important union leader. He was the first black paid organizer for his union, United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, which was the most progressive union in the United States. And he became head of their fair employment practices, so he worked nationally with unions all over the country and tried to help them understand that unity of the working class meant that you had to eliminate inequality for workers of color and you had to eliminate inequality for women. So part of the work he did was very remarkable series of women's conferences, conferences for women's rights. But his union, because it was progressive, was attacked by McCarthyism, and he lost his job in that process. He was very depressed, and because he was blacklisted by McCarthyism, he was having a hard time finding a new job. So my mom said, well, I think you should desegregate the schools. Their mom to the, Dr. Mom's cure for dad's depression. Could you please get back to work? And my dad said, what can we do? We don't have any people or any machinery. But it is enough to say to an organizer, would you please go organize? He found a way. And the schools were desegregated in 3 months. This was a remarkable win for a black community that was a minority in Orange, New Jersey. 20% of the population had no political power, had no political life. That was his motivation. That's me. Yeah. And this is the gerrymander. So the gerrymander went right through the park, and you can see that south, there's where it says Haywood District. There were white families living there, and they were bused to Haywood Avenue School, whereas we lived on Alcott Street. We walked to Oakwood Avenue School. It's quite a remarkable gerrymander because it picked up the black families who lived south of Central Avenue, but excluded the white families who lived south of Central Avenue. Because this was post Brown versus Board of Education, this was easy to undo. This was de jure segregation and clearly in defiance of the law. People were really energized, and so they wanted to get together and they wanted to start organizing. They wanted to run a black candidate for office. So they put Dr. John Alexander, a local pediatrician, up for office, and they made a platform. And the platform was a citywide platform, but it's a platform of issues that to this day in our work in Orange we find to be a guiding set of principles. You'll see it includes redevelopment and relocation, unemployment, the freeway, the school system, civil rights, recreation and juvenile delinquency, and representative government. It was a citywide platform because they were running in a citywide election. But the lesson that my father always tries to teach to all the people in Orange who were really new to political organizing and political power was be programmatic, find what you're for. That you can't run against, you have to run for. And so on the basis of that, he was able to build people's power. The first part of it, finding what you're for, was really to build your base. And the base was the black families that lived in the East Ward, the black ghetto of Orange. But then you have to build coalition. In the center of this photo is Ben Jones, who was the first African American to be elected to office in Orange, New Jersey, representing the East Ward. But surrounding him are members of the Italian community, which was a very important political force and political ally, and they wanted a bocce court. So there's Ben learning how to play bocce. Building coalition was essential. A minority can't take power by itself. You have to have allies. And the opposition is, you can't let the opposition get you down. Dr. Alexander was viciously attacked when he became head of the Board of Education. This leaflet said, Mayor Nikito Hitler dictator Franco said, I'm proud that I appointed John the murderer Alexander to the Board of Education so we could do the following. We want to murder your children. This actually went out to households all over Orange, New Jersey. But reason prevailed and coalition prevailed. And the coalition was able to pull together to win important advances. At that time, our school system was threatened with loss of accreditation for our high school. We were able to convince the city that all the children of Orange needed a new high school and to build a state-of-the-art facility. Dr. Alexander is there in his sunglasses, celebrating accomplishments. It is really essential to celebrate every accomplishment, however small, because this work is long, this work is hard. And you have to tell your story and pass the baton. My dad wrote a book, and it is amazing how important this book is, because otherwise this story would be lost, as so many stories are. We're reissuing the book this year as part of our organizing for 400 Years of Inequality. We think that the nation should read this story of people's power and building of coalition as we think through what do we do in these days to make things move in a better direction. So thinking now about culture of health, these are the county health rankings. And this is a really important model. New Jersey, which is where Robert Wood Johnson is located, has a program called Culture of Health in New Jersey. And so those of us organizing in Orange wanted to apply as a coalition. But you have this list, and it's just a list. So what do you do with this list? Are all things created equal? I happen to be serving on a committee at for the Task Force on Community Preventive Services of the CDC on education. And so CDC loves logic models. I love so they don't make lists. They try to say, this is how things are organized. This is the flow. This is what influences what. And so it occurred to me, looking at our logic model, that education actually was the linchpin. It wasn't just another factor on the list, but that level of education influences everything that's on the list. Very, very powerful force. And education in Orange educational attainment was low. 60% of jobs in the United States require an associate's or higher, but only 40% of the people in the United States have an associate's or higher, and Orange is certainly in that situation. And when you compare that to neighboring South Orange, you can see that average annual income is a fraction of what our neighbors get. So how do we increase educational income? So that's the South Orange line, and that's the orange line. And how do we shift that? We were very fortunate to be awarded a Culture of Health grant, and it's been wonderful work. Part of the work of the first year was that we were supposed to write a blueprint. And they gave our leadership team tools, boundary-spanning leadership tools, which was a great investment. And one of the tools was these cards, which are supposed to help promote cross-cultural communication. So we're working through this and convincing people that education is part of health is part of a culture of health shift, because people have been quite convinced that access to health care is what health is. You say to people, oh, we want better health. They'll say, well, we need a new clinic. They won't say we need more education. So people were very confused. So we pulled out these cards, we laid them on the floor, and so the gentleman who's staring is Dewan, one of the members of our core organizing committee. And he picked a card, and it was an older person holding a baby. And he said, "This makes me sad because there's so much violence and nobody is paying attention." This was a really crucial moment in our strategic planning because you don't necessarily think of violence in the pathway to education any more than you think of education in the pathway to health. And yet these things are all working together. We, through this analysis, realized that people, resources, and learning communities in Orange were isolated from one another and that we had to connect them. So this is, in a way, we are all in this. This we are in is quite fractured, quite isolating. What we have, we can't use. So we have to move to that. And so we're all thinking of moving that line, that famous educational attainment line. We have to remove obstacles, increase connectivity, and have lifelong learning for all. So we did speed dating so that we could begin to connect the idea that organizations had resources. This is another project, looking at our obstacles, looking at our resources, how are they connected. So we got funding. As this became clearer, we knew what to go get money for. And we got money for an anti-violence program that was looking at using collective recovery. And when Duan heard about it, he said, "This is so clear. It's right on target. There are no solutions for certain things. People just want to have their feelings acknowledged. There was a shooting across the street while kids were crossing the street for gym. This work recognizes that something happened." So in light of this, I just want to come back to the 400th anniversary of 1619 and try to pull this together. That we think there are 5 habits of highly effective people's parties because all of you, I'm sure, are now thinking, what are we going to do in my community on October 12th, 2019? First, you have to acknowledge everyone's suffering, including your own. We all have skin in this game. We are in this together. You have to find the stories that give you sorrow and the stories that give you hope. You must have both. Inequality in this country is a source of great tragedy, but people's resistance and persistence are stories of amazing joy. You have to invite everyone to be on your committee, but especially teenagers. They're liminal, they're the change agents, they know everything. Don't be afraid to name the problems, past and present. Don't let the politicians and the bureaucrats insist it look pretty, or be nice. Politicians and the bureaucrats want everything to be polished, perfect, but this is not such a story. And be sure to use this time to remember where we came from and to imagine where we are going. What are we for? And that beautiful piece, Imagining Belonging, should be, I think, everywhere as we think about 2019 and these 400 years of inequality. Imagine belonging. And we just wanted to close with an image from a block party that Healthy Orange was part of 2 boys reading. Thank you so much.
Well, I think we would all agree that that was inspirational, and I think we were all clear about where you got your inspiration from your parents. So again, thank you for that. I did have a question. I think something that is bothersome to me, in this time of rhetoric that is so divisive, what are the challenges? We know what the challenges are in terms of being for. And I think sometimes the divisiveness gets more traction being against something than being for something. And when we think about health equity, that seems to be such a big term and something that's so out there. So how do you help us think about working through the challenges of being for something that really can bring people together, given the being against something?
This is why we want people to read Homeboy Came to Orange. When my dad, Ernie, started organizing in Orange, people weren't together. The Black community couldn't walk up to white people and say, let's make coalition. You know, they were like, those are those dirty Negroes in the ghetto. We don't have to pay attention to them. They don't have any power. They don't matter. And when they made that citywide platform, it wasn't that anybody else in the city wanted to work with them. But having a citywide platform means that you are speaking to the issues of the city. And after a while, people have to acknowledge, people want a bocce court. Ben Jones built 6 swimming pools in Orange. It had the highest number of pools per capita population in the United States for a while. So on the basis of what you're for, you can build coalition. It's difficult, but you have to constantly keep saying what you are for.
So my other question is, a lot of the solutions or again, the issues of what you're for, or linchpins, certainly might vary from community to community. And I think some of the strategies vary from community to community. But are there lessons learned or principles that can be used to sort of accelerate this movement, so it's not just an isolated, we do something well, but we can't scale or move forward there? So just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, that's why we're so interested in this anniversary of 2019, because we think that when you learn about Jamestown, what you learn is that a lot of different people were there. Why were the Africans being brought over? They were being brought over to work on plantations. Wait a minute, that land belonged to the Powhatan Indians. And so it's also a story of stealing land from the Indians. Also in 1619 there was a shipload of women who were brought over to be indentured servants, but as one historian pointed out, they were basically to be sex slaves. Jamestown is, they had cannibalism, they had all kinds of wild stuff going on over there. When you learn this history, it opens your mind. And we need to open our minds. I think that the thing we are all missing is, what is the common story? We're in a common story, and we need to learn it and think about it. And I think sometimes an anniversary is a blessing. Just let it be a time when we read the same books, we talk about the same moment in time. We learned that Jamestown was kind of Lord of the Flies, and there's a little bit Lord of Flies in the DNA of this nation. And every once in a while it pops up. And then we say, wait, where did that come from? I'm telling you where it came from. It came from Jamestown.
I love the thought that one of your principles is that acknowledge that everyone is hurting. And I think sometimes in these isolated movements, we tend to forget that. So I think having that common language and knowing that everyone is affected, but I think sometimes this inequity results because what makes me feel better is not going to make you feel better, or may have an adverse effect. So it's like we have to make our pie bigger, recognizing we need more pie. So,
it's a complicated question. My students always say, as we talk about white privilege, they say, but wait, isn't white privilege going to save them or us, depending on who they are? I'm like, well, what do you think? Is white privilege saving you from climate change? It's going to save me. No, actually, it's not. The things that are happening to all of us. And nobody is protected by anything. And so when we say acknowledge everyone's suffering, including your own, sort of how injustice everywhere, right? Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. How do we take that? What is that doing to my heart? So Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said, the white man needs the Negro's love. And by that he meant that the privilege of whiteness in the context of segregation was injuring the souls of the white people. So how do you say, wait, my soul has been hurt by racism? How do you take that in? How do you begin to open your heart so that you know you were hurt by racism? You, white people, were hurt. So that's what we think is this revolution of consciousness that gets us to understand what Robert Wood Johnson is trying to get us to hear, that we're all in this together.
Do we have time for one or two questions from the audience? Questions?
So there's I'm Velma McBride Murray from Vanderbilt University. There's been a recent research finding that's not getting a lot of public press. Going back to what you were saying earlier about desegregation or segregation and its impact on whites. So this recent research finding is showing the major decline in white, middle-class whites' health as a consequence of all of the social changes and injustice that's going around in our society right now. What is interesting to me is that it isn't receiving national attention. And so there's a colleague of mine at Vanderbilt in Medicine, Health, and Society who has actually documented ways in which, as our society becomes much more unjust, that it spills over to not only affect those that are often affected disproportionately, but now they're seeing it having a major impact on chronic illness and lifespan shortness among whites.
It's a very important observation. The greatest shift in inequality over the past few decades has been the inequality in wealth, which may be allowed to accelerate with this new tax bill. And that means that working people of all ethnicities have been stripped of wealth. And this is a stunning thing. We cannot create a culture of health in the face of concentration of wealth of the sort we have seen in our society. And that, too, has not received any. In fact, if you think about the conversation about white privilege, it really just leapfrogs the fact that this concentration of wealth has stripped everyone. So we do have a lot of thinking to do about the complexity of this picture and the complexity of the ecology of inequality.
One more question?
Hi, Angela Diaz. I'm from the Icahn School of Medicine in New York City. Can you expand on why you think it's so important for young people to be involved? And also, should they be running this country?
It's possible they wouldn't do it worse. That's a great question. And Angela, as people may know, runs a fabulous adolescent healthcare center. It is essential for teenagers in this project that we're proposing, 400 Years of Inequality. As you go back to your communities and organize a committee, it's essential that you have teenagers on the committee because teenagers actually live in neighborhoods. And a lot of us who live in one neighborhood and we work in another. We don't take public transportation, we don't go to the public school, we don't go to the public park, but teenagers do. Teenagers really live where they live. And so they know things that we don't know. They're also at that strange moment between childhood and adulthood. So they're watching everybody. They're watching their parents and their parents' friends, a lot of embarrassed looks among the parents, and they're watching the children, and they can explain everything to everybody. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have that extra 10 years of brain development that's going to give them good judgment, but their knowledge is unbelievable. So getting them involved is just a remarkable experience in terms of new ideas, fresh ways of thinking, and information that you won't have access to in any other way. So yeah, thank you for that question. We are fervent believers in that.
Well, please join me in thanking Mindy for her inspirational talk. And I think we would all be interested in learning about how we might learn and be involved in your timeline of inequity. That might be even something we take up as our culture of health movement here.
Great.